first ever mission over Iraq, I went and they said, it's a bombing mission. And I was like, President Bush Jr. had just taken over, and we wondered if it was like a flexing of his muscles, you know. I spun through like 120 degrees and I'm going backwards down the runway at 160 miles an hour. We were engaged by a surface-to-air missile and it was coming straight towards us. Let's take it from the start. 3,000 applicants, one person ends up in the fast jet cockpit. The closest you would ever get to this is stealth at Thorpe Park.
And do you have any colleagues that ever got shot down or injured or anything like that?
Yep, I did. They crashed into the ground in really poor weather and they never came home. In my time in the Air Force, I've done loads of trials from wearing a nappy. I tell you, as a grown woman, you can't just when you're not drunk. Sorry, did I just say that? I'm sorry.
Hello and welcome to the Behind the Screens podcast with me, Curtis.
And me, James.
Today we're joined by a really remarkable guest, Mandy Hickson. Mandy, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Curtis. Nice to see you, James.
Awesome. And Mandy, you've broken the barrier by being one of the first female RAF pilots. And now you've broken the barrier by being one of the first female guest on Behind the Screens.
Made it. To be honest, that's actually the trailblazer one that I want. Sod the rest of it, yeah.
So I'm not sure which one's like more prestigious.
Well, I'm up at the top of the board over there, so I'm very happy.
So Mandy, for everyone listening, can you give a bit of context about who you are?
Sure.
What you've been about and some of the achievements that you've had in life?
Yeah, absolutely. So how long have we got? No, I'm joking. I was one of the very first female fast jet pilots in the Royal Air Force. I served full-time, just under 17 years, then 8 years as a reservist as well, so like 25 years in total. During that time, I flew the Tornado GR4. I mean, think Top Gun, but, you know, with one fin, not two. And, yeah, I saw operational service in Iraq. So I did 3 tours of duty in Iraq, just under 50 combat missions as well. That was defending the no-fly zone in the build-up to Gulf War II. And, yeah, then I left 12 years ago and set up my own business. We worked at over 100,000 school children now. Wow. Looking at just, you know, reframing role models for the future as well. And I speak to businesses as well. So, yeah, it's been a really interesting journey with 2 very distinct lives I've led, but both equally as exciting and equally as rewarding.
Nice. So let's go back a bit and talk about what sparked your interest in aviation. Was there a particular moment or person that you decided to pursue a career as a pilot, especially in the RAF?
Yeah, I mean, my grandpa was a really strong role model for me. He was a pilot in the Second World War. But when the Air Cadets opened their doors to girls, I joined and I went flying with them. And you just realise that these organisations that run in the background, that young people can join from all sorts of backgrounds, you know, it's a meritocracy within there. It's not about money. It's not about, you know, backgrounds at all. And I joined a flew and I remember saying to the pilot, "Excuse me, sir, do you get paid for this?" And he said, "It's my career." And I thought, oh my God, I mean, I was growing up in Manchester and I think I'd been surrounded by, you know, as most people were in the 1970s and 80s. I know that's a long time before your time. But by people who basically went to work to make money.
Yeah.
And this was the first time I was hearing of someone talking about a career and a passion in the first sentence, in the same sentence. And I thought, right, that's what I want to do. I want to fly fast jets in the Air Force.
Amazing. And what was the process of you actually getting to that stage where you became one of the first female RAF pilots?
It is pretty brutal, actually. So at this stage, though, when I was first interested in doing it, women weren't allowed to be pilots in the Air Force. So imagine, chosen the impossible dream. How'd you get there?
Yeah.
Chipped away at it, constantly did everything I could when I was at school as a young person, you know, everything from your sort of head girl, prefect, you know, all of those things that I thought, well, when it changes, at least I'm in a really good position. I got a flying scholarship, which gave me 30 hours of free flying. From there, I went on and got my private pilot's license with literally money I had used that I'd saved up from my newspaper round.
Brilliant.
Those things used to exist, yes. And basically I then went off to university and I was in my second year at uni when they changed the rules and now I'm in a perfect position. And I applied and then I failed all the tests to be a pilot, not once but twice. Oh, I am a success story, I promise. You just have to dig really deep.
If at first you don't succeed.
Yeah, just keep on going. I heard a really good quote, I loved it the other day. It said, "They're not stumbling blocks, they are stepping stones." And I thought, oh my God, that's great. I really like that. I thought I'm going to steal that, use it in my speeches. But yeah, and eventually, after taking these tests twice and failing them twice, they actually started to look. There was a guy on that University Air Squadron that had joined this club. And he sort of thought, hold on a minute, this doesn't make sense because I was flying regularly and I was proving myself to be a really capable pilot. but this is a mismatch with the test results. And so he didn't say test results, she's failed, she's rubbish. He said, she's good, test results must be really poor. And he challenged the system on my behalf. And in the end, they took me on as a test case.
Brilliant.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you finally get into the RAF, you get in there. Talk to me about the perception of your peers and colleagues. How did that look?
So it's a really interesting time. I mean, it's incredibly rewarding, but it's also quite challenging because you are going into what is traditionally long-standing all-male environment. Absolutely. So you're pretty much every squadron you serve on, every course you're going on to, you're the only woman. And that can be a bit isolating, or it would have been had it not been for the peers that I had. So I had incredible support from all of the guys. I mean, if you think you start officer training with each other, and that is a period where you do so much growing because you build up a lot of resilience, but also if you imagine you're going on a team away day, you're doing that every day for 6 months. So actually, these guys are your best friends, and they really went the extra mile for me so many times, as I did for them as well. And it really is that sort of like camaraderie at its absolute pinnacle of unselfish teamwork. I mean, the only time I did have more problems was when I probably got to the front line and they'd never had a woman on the squadron before. And that was really challenging. You are breaking down some serious barriers. I mean, they changed the process. They hadn't changed anything behind it. So policy here, but no female toilets, no female flying kit. Every screensaver is a naked woman. I made them all naked men. The next day, they were all landscapes. It's like, oh, look at that, subtle changes. I mean, this is the sort of like from your experiences. Might be films you've watched of the 1990s where it's like, oh my God, did they really get away with that? But that's the way it was at the time. And I was just so delighted to have been given the chance to do what I was doing that, you can't put the lens of today's culture on what was going on 25 years ago. And that's really important. So we've just had our 30-year reunion. We literally joined the Air Force 30 years ago this month. Oh my God, that makes me feel so old, by the way. But we could still drink as heavily, so we were very happy.
Nice. And did you feel, because you're one of the first female RAF pilots, did you feel a lot of pressure being in the spotlight? Or was it quite easy to navigate that?
Of course you do, because you feel you've got to be twice as good. I was not twice as good, by the way, but you feel that constant pressure. There was also this other feeling for myself, which was the fact they'd taken me on as a test case to see if these tests were flawed or that there was an unconscious bias within that. And, if you're told that you're a test case and you're also told that you're being taken on to see how far you'll get before you fail, that's going to sit over as quite a big psychological barrier as well. If you want to know what imposter syndrome looks like, there it is. They're telling you won't make it. And so every time you sort of struggle on a flight, and these are brutal flights, they describe it as doing an advanced driving test twice a day for 10 months. Wow. So this is really tough. The stress levels are through the roof, and yet you're still waiting to fail. So there was always this sense of must prove myself, must be better than. And that is quite challenging to be living at that level of stress at all time.
Where you were essentially a test case, did you feel at the time that there was a tokenism behind it? Or did you just feel like at the time, they really were trying to break the barrier and do something amazing?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good question, actually, because when women were first sort of taken on, they changed the rules. There were so few of them going through that it was often referred to as, is there a sort of level of tokenism? But Jo Salter, who was the very first female fast jet pilot, she was absolutely brilliant. She was right up there as the trailblazer. There was no tokenism to her. She proved herself in that arena, absolutely. And I think there was a slight thing after Jo had gone through. There were a couple of other girls that were going through the process, or women that were going through the process, and they weren't making the grade in the fast jet community. And yet politically, all the instructors felt they had to be passing them because they were women. That did nothing for our cause, by the way. And in the end, it was the girls on that course that said, I'm sorry, stop throwing trips at me, stop making me pass, because actually it was degrading the level and the standard that you have to do. And some of the guys were failing with not as many hours. Right. So it just wasn't fair. So by the time I came through, it was almost like in this second tranche that we came through. And by then, that feeling of tokenism had definitely changed. On my initial officer training, there were 4 of us who were female pilots, which was great. We went on to fly all different things.
And just because it's a different world for me entirely. What's it like going in a jet by yourself for the first time? What does that feel like?
I would say really scary, but actually it's really bizarre because they're not just throwing in you at the deep end. It's not like, oh my God, what should we do today? Take a fast jet up.
Yeah.
So your first trip is in a Hawk, which is the sort of same aircraft that the Red Arrows fly in.
Okay.
So it's like we would describe it as a little mini sports car of the fast jet world. It's a great training aircraft.
Yeah.
And, it's we always say, it's that like the fires, kick the tyres and off you go, compared to, say, the Tornado, which is a massive step up in technology and, capability. But the Hawk was brilliant. And you've done loads of trips in the simulator by then. You've also got about 300 hours of flying under your belt by each one's a stepping stone. So you'll start by flying at 120 miles an hour. The next course is another aircraft that flies at 240 to 300 miles an hour. And then you're on the Hawk, which is now going at 420 to 500 miles an hour. And so each one's...
I'm just like seeing these numbers.
What?
What does that mean?
Yeah, it's 7 miles a minute at low level. That's pretty quick, isn't it? So, so each one is this stepping stone. So by the time you actually get to fly the Hawk, you're sort of ready for it. You've done the simulators. You know everything, where everything is. But I tell you what, the first solo that you do, they call it Around the Island, and it's in Anglesey in Wales, and you just take off and you literally just fly around the island and then you land back. Oh my God, it's brilliant fun because you're just going, woohoo! How can we get as fast as we possibly can without breaking the sound barrier? So no, it's really good fun.
Sorry, what's the pass rate out of like a group of people that go in? How many people actually make it?
Well, okay, so they would say they have, let's take it from the start, 3,000 applicants at the start. One person ends up in the fast jet cockpit. So that's your sort of level of competition to get to that stage. Each course, you would say you start with 10, you probably lose 2 at each stage. So by the time you are now on the next course, that initial 10 that started flying training, you will probably have 5 of them, maybe 4, maybe getting to the fast jet cockpit and that final course. Yeah. So it's it's pretty competitive.
I just want to deviate slightly back to your point there. You've gone from the simulator and now you're doing 400-500 miles an hour. Physically, when you first step into the cockpit, like what does it feel like when you're doing those sorts of speeds?
Yeah, so I think people sort of think flying and they think, oh, don't spill my gin and tonic, there's a little bit of turbulence. Yeah. I mean, I've got videos of me flying at low level, it's like, and you are literally going along like that. And so, the acceleration of when you plug so let's say, look at a Tornado, when you plug your burners in to take off, so, we light the burner, all that jargon that goes with it. You literally take your feet off the brakes, you are thrust back in your seat with about 2G. So the closest you would ever get to this is stealth at Thorpe Park. Have you done it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that feeling literally of when they just take the brakes off and you are back in your seat and you go, I think, from 0 to 4G as it pulls over that one wing over. That's what it's like taking off in a fast jet. Right. So your cheeks do get pushed back. You are pushed back in your seat. Your body becomes heavy. Sometimes when you're doing things like air-to-air combat, you'll be experiencing like 7 times the force of gravity, where your body's now about the same weight as a Formula 1 car. So, that whole impact of G-force on your body is enormous as well. So it's a very physical thing to be doing.
And what's that feel like when you get out the cockpit and your feet on the ground again?
Bloody hell, I'm knackered. Yeah, no, it's really funny. I mean, gosh, when you go and fly, I mean, we do a trip where you fly back and you bring the jets home, or, you do what's called a trail across the Atlantic. And we are, on the Tornado, we're limited to 8 hours of flying because that is how long your oil will last to supply the engine. So after that, the oil levels are too low, so you need to land. So you pick up fuel while you're flying through air-to-air refueling. And so the limit is that 8 hours is the oil. Well, it's also a bladder size as well. Yeah. So, that is challenging as well because, all of those sorts of things, as well as that human performance. So when you've been sitting still, you think you're sitting still, but you're focused.
Yeah.
You think how long the attention span of the normal person is. I'm not saying it's changed particularly every time, but I do have the 19-year-old and a 21-year-old, so I am aware of that sort of thing. But, it has changed. And, they say that the average watch time on a clip is 7 seconds. Yeah. I'm thinking, 7 seconds? Try 8 hours of focused concentration. You finished, you're absolutely exhausted.
That's incredible to think about. Yeah. And you mentioned something there about going to the toilet on the plane. And I saw this clip in your Lab Bible interview. For people that don't know, can you just talk about that a little bit and what it's like to be a female up in the sky for 8 hours?
It's really challenging. So in my time in the Air Force, I've done loads of trials from wearing a nappy. I can tell you, as a grown woman, you can't just wee. Just when you're not drunk. Sorry, did I just say that? I'm sorry. But you know that feeling of they just say, put this nappy on and be flying the airplane and just wet yourself. You're like, your body just doesn't let you do it. You've been so programmed not to do that. But yeah, the physicalities are that you have to, as a man, they get a small plastic bag with a very, very dehydrated sponge in there, of which they can have a wee into the bag, and then the sponge just absorbs, and it therefore becomes a solid mass. So you're not got water or urine sploshing around.
They just throw it out the window.
Then they just open it up, they toss it out, and they say, "Oh, that's landed on a farm down there. That should be fine." Yeah, you just store it in your little satchel thing at the side. But for a woman, obviously you haven't got an appendage that helps you with that, and so. Yeah, I mean, once over Iraq, I tried to have a wee and it just ended in disaster because I thought I'm going to have a wee in a bottle. And it was a much bigger bottle than the normal one. It was like a big litre. And it was full. I thought I'm going to have to drink the water to enable there to be space for me to then wee in it. So I made the whole thing 100 times worse by drinking a litre of water to then try and have a wee and failed to have a wee. But what it took was me taking off a life support jacket, a combat survival waistcoat, my flying suit from underneath. You've unstrapped from your ejection seat. So if I get shot at now, I can't eject from the aircraft, and neither can my nav. Yeah. So he's had to make his seat safe. I put a pin in it, which would mean he couldn't physically eject. And I'm now trying to strip off to then put a bottle to wee in a bottle. Anyway, the whole thing went pear-shaped while he's in the back saying, there's a surface-to-air missile looking at us, Mandy. I'm thinking, well, it better not fire because this is not boding well. No, so it's really, really challenging. It is a challenging environment, of which they haven't really come up with a solution. They are still working on it. You know, they are talking everything from catheterization and things like that, but none of these are perfect solutions. But they are working on it. There's been a lot of studies done on this now. And
do you feel like they still have a long way to go to change the culture and things like that in the RAF?
No, I think we are very much making huge railroads towards the culture changing. It's a completely different culture. I think what's helping is that we now have a lot of women in senior leadership roles as well. And that's been fantastic because that's that whole role modelling. So you are seeing people, through their entirety of their career. So the highest ranking female aircrew was a woman, Soraya Marshall, that I joined my officer training with, and we're really great friends. And she has been a fantastic ambassador of that. She was a navigator. That whole structure is changing, and we're at about 12% of women in the armed forces, which hasn't gone up dramatically yet. They had got a target of 2030 to reach 30% women. I doubt that they will ever get there, to be honest. But the Air Force has got a higher proportion than the 12%. But we're still shockingly short of pilots. And so I think they've just taken their foot off the gas with regards to creating those role models as well. And also, while all of the women that had joined, like myself, in that first tranche, while we were still serving, we were not visible. We were just getting on with our jobs. You know, it's only after we've now left, and then we now build up profiles on things like social media, that ultimately other people and younger people can now see those and say, I mean, I get messages on, direct messages on all the social media platforms every single day from young people saying, thank you, this has inspired me. I hadn't really thought about this as a career until I've heard you. And that's brilliant because that's what you need, visibility. And we're seeing it loads in the States as well. I mean, there's loads of, fast jet pilots who are women who are posting all the time, which is fantastic.
Yeah, nice.
Other than visibility and, you guys telling your stories, is there anything you think can and should be done to, improve the diversity in the Air Force? So
the former Chief of the Air Staff, the head of the Air Force, basically went for a policy change. I think it was about 3 years ago now, where he basically said, right, we're just going to really put a push on recruiting women and ethnic minorities, which was not very good for a lot of white men, basically. But they said, look, our ranks are made up of predominantly white men, and if we want our diversity of our forces to reflect the diversity of our population, we need to do something different. And so he put a real push on women and ethnic minorities. It hit the press. It did not go down well because I think you're breaking quite a few of the, equality and diversity laws out there as well on recruiting. And so things have changed pretty quickly. But in that short period, there were a lot of women that it wasn't that they were actively recruited; they were already in the pool. And rather than just saying, right, you're number 18, let's put them up to the forefront and just get them in a little bit quicker. And actually, all it did was change the order of which people were actually joining the Air Force by 3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
You know, and people that lost out because of that were actually recompensed as well financially.
Yeah.
So nobody actually lost out in the end. But the press that went with that was some really bad press. So they have tried a few initiatives like that, which do make a difference, you know, because again, you start to see that and things start to change.
Makes sense. Keen to move on now to like the kind of tough calls you have to make when you're in active duty. I mean, like high stakes situations, it must come with so much pressure and quick thinking, but interested in how the ethical side of things comes into this. So when you're in these high pressure moments, like what's going on in your mind? Is there instinct? Is it thought, training? What happens when you have to make these decisions?
So if you think of you've got to take yourself back from that moment. So in that moment, you've got some massive decisions to make. But before that, you have spent years training. Before that mission, you have spent hours planning. You have spent hours and hours in a simulator running through similar scenarios, because what they're trying to do is create enough capacity in your brain that the flying side can be almost the automatic side. Sure. So when you're on a mission, for example, you've planned, you've covered every what if scenario. So when something happens, you're not just reacting to things, you are giving a measured response, because I'm not thinking of something for the first time. And that's, I think, where we get confused, because we think, I mean, when things do happen, obviously things do happen and things go wrong, or, you know, circumstances change. I mean, I was shot at once by a surface-to-air missile and the whole mission changed completely. But again, what you're going to be using is the skill set that you've been building up over those years of training and experience to give your brain the capacity to make the judgment call. And that ethical decision-making comes down to your integrity, your values, but also all of the training that you've received, because at that moment, the call that you're going to make will affect the lives of people, not only on the ground, but also within your formation, potentially. And you've got to be able to live with the consequence of your actions. So that is really, really important.
Yeah, I was just going to say, was there ever a moment that you had to make one of those decisions and you regret it now?
There is not one, and I don't mean that in an arrogant way at all, there is not one moment where we made, I think, the wrong call up there. There was one mission where we were in Iraq, and it was really early on in my career, actually. And this is where your training plays out. So in my training, I've been on the Tornado fleet for about 6 months by this point, and before going out to Iraq, we went off to drop a live weapon, and they want you to have done this for the first time, you know, not in a war zone, so that you're used to the weight of the missile, the weapon that you're carrying, and you do it on a range over the sea. And so you're dropping a weapon on the sea. Anyway, myself and my navigator weren't off. It was quite a stormy day. We perhaps shouldn't have been flying on that day because the crest of the waves were too big. We flew the target pattern. We thought we had the correct target, and we dropped our weapon. And when we look back on the video, we dropped it on a crest of a wave, basically. We didn't drop it on anything, which was not good. Yeah. And when we were analysed on the videotape, so it's the navigator in the back that's all now called a weapon system operator. So I'm sort of positioning in them. I say I'm the taxi driver, you can do all the hard work. So the taxi driver has got them to the right place, and then the weapon systems operator is looking at thermal imaging. You know, we've got lots of different pods and pieces of technology that help us. And yeah, he identified something that wasn't there. Now, I felt horrific because we'd done that. So fast forward, now we're in the Gulf. I'm on a target run. We've been tasked to destroy it was called an SA-6 missile system. And we would set up for the target run. And as we were running in, you know, I'm sort of giving the talk down. I'm sort of saying 1 minute to go. My navigator's in the back. He's doing lots of hard work, and he's saying continue. 30 seconds, continue. And then switches get made live, and so I'm literally, all of my switches are now live. I've got my hand hovering over a big button, which is to be able to drop the weapon. And we went 3, 2, and I would have been dropping on 1 and drop. 3, 2, and he goes, stop, stop, stop. And at this point, he saw a man with a camel just walking into what would have been called the fragmentation zone. Sure. And so basically he said, stop, stop, stop. Now, that is absolutely fine. Switches all get made. You know, we're safe. We're not going to drop our weapon on that day. We're not going to re-attack. We're not going to do anything. We just go home. Only when we looked at the videos afterwards was he would have been injured. Now, this was not a high priority target. This was us trying to basically destroy certain targets that we were being given. But it was not high priority. And so you have what's called, different levels. And this was not a high level. And so actually you do what's right. And so in that thing, if I had dropped, would I have had regret? Yes, I would. What had I learnt from? Dropping a weapon on a crest of a wave in training. And that's why you do it. So you learn from your mistakes so that you don't actually pan them out in real time where people's lives can be at risk.
And like, let's say, for example, that guy that you mentioned, the guy with the camel.
Yeah.
After that mission, you got back on the ground. Did you think about that person? And
yeah, of course you do. Yeah, because ultimately, 1 second later, and he probably wouldn't have died. Actually, just want to say that, not that, but he wouldn't have died because he would have been injured.
Yeah,
and that's not our job. Our values and our integrity and our training hopefully allow you to make the right ethical decision under pressure at the right time, and that is what's really, really important.
And do you have any colleagues that ever got shot down or injured or anything like that?
Yep, I did. So I've written a book and the chapter is called The Darkest Day. And I was helping two guys, Sean Casabeo and Dickie Wright, 25 years ago this month, helped them plan a mission up in Scotland. I was on the operational conversion unit for the Tornado. We were the junior course going through. They were like the Top Gun course, so they were doing what's called the Qualified Weapons Instructors course, so they were all highly experienced pilots and navigators. I helped them stick their maps together because, you know, as the junior course, you're just there to help these guys because they were like the top guns, and they never came home.
Oh, wow.
And basically, they crashed into the ground in really poor weather near Newcastle. And the shock that you have, we always think about people who lose their lives in war. There are so many that lose their lives in training. A week later, Steve Todd, the guy that had gone through one of my flying training courses, died as well. Flew in a Hawk, had to crash into, he just fortunately just missed a school building and crashed into a deserted house, actually, in the Lake District. So this is the reality of life. I was airborne when that Hawk was flying. I was on a training trip, excuse me, and my husband, my boyfriend at the time, was flying Hawks down from Yeovilton, and we heard that a Hawk had just crashed. I'm airborne. There aren't that many Hawks that are flying in the UK at that moment, and I knew that Craig was flying. I had to fly and concentrate on that whole mission, knowing that potentially my boyfriend had died. It was horrific. Really horrific.
How do you block that out of your mind?
With huge difficulty. It was a really critical sortie as well. So it was like the end of a phase that I had to pass that course, that trip. And yeah, I always say control the controllables. And so, you know, it's really easy. I want you to like imagine you've got this stress bucket and your stress bucket's constantly filling up and it's always filling up with superfluous stuff, isn't it? You know, like, oh my goodness, there's a drill going off somewhere. What can we do about it? You can either get really stressed about something or you can action it. If it's something that is actionable, great, take control of it. But if it's not, let it go. Because there's nothing you can do about it. And that's what's really, really important as well. So that is the way I always say that mantra is control the controllables. And if you can't, let it go. It literally has kept me alive at 30,000 feet. And quite frankly, sane on the ground ever since.
Yeah, amazing. And you mentioned before, I wanted to get a bit more about the Iraq combat. And you mentioned that you did, was it 50-something missions over the no-fly zone?
Just under 50.
What was it like going out for the first time?
Really scary because my first ever mission, so the majority of our missions that I did were reconnaissance. You know, we were taking photos, we were then trialling new bits of kit where we were data linking some of our imagery to troops on the ground. But, you know, the majority were reconnaissance. And then my first ever mission over Iraq, I went and they said, it's a bombing mission. And I was like, and apparently the guy that was standing as a friend of mine, standing at the front briefing, he said, your eyes literally went like saucers, Mandy. It was like, okay, right, I've arrived. Okay, this is going to be fine. And that mission, by the way, was the one I've just described, where we didn't drop the weapon.
Right.
So talk about pressure. That's your first ever sortie. And then I kept also thinking when he'd said stop, that it was me that had messed up. I kept thinking, oh my goodness, it's me that's messed up because it's my first ever trip. So, but that first one, you know, it's hot out there. It's 40 degrees. It's sandy. It's this desert. You've never flown in anywhere that's not the UK. And this is where you sort of say, talk about training and why it's so important that we do deploy to other countries. Like we go to America, we do a huge exercise just outside Las Vegas, you know, flying over the Arizona desert. Because you've got to train harder than you're ever going to fight for real.
Yeah. And you mentioned, we've spoken a little bit about psychology and the mental health side of things as well. Is there any particular mission that, like when you talk about mental health, just always sticks out in your mind?
Yeah, it wasn't a mission actually. It was a flight in Canada in Goose Bay. And basically, I don't know if you've ever heard like this saying, like the error chain, you know, where you've got this error chain, you've got to break the error chain, you know, and you see these great adverts of, you know, chains breaking. Well, this was exactly it. So we were on the operational conversion unit. So that means that we're training to fly the Tornado. So we're really new. We've got 30 hours on it. So imagine you've got 30 hours of driving your car for the first time. And you're like, oh, I'm still quite new at this. Should be fine. So I'm over in Canada. We're doing air-to-air combat. And to get this flight to count, we had to do what's called one more merge. So you've got two airplanes that come against each other in this merge. I was against my friend Puppy. And we're going to have this battle in the sky. Anyway, he said, look, we just need to get one more in, then this can be a tick, this is going to be the sortie will have worked. But the weather was getting really, really poor. We're talking massive thunderstorms. Normally you hold a diversion airfield. Now, where we were in Canada, in this place called Goose Bay, the airfields were so far away that our diversion actually was going to be bizarrely our second runway that you've got. And so you can have different classifications as to what you have as diversions and how much fuel you therefore need to keep. Anyway, we were right on our fuel minimums, and I said, right, we needed to knock it off and head back. At which point, air traffic control told us there was a huge thunderstorm coming straight over the airfield, and we're thinking, that is not good. So at this point, we said, right, well, we'll line up and you come in what's called an instrument approach, so a precision approach radar. So there's a person in air traffic control and they've got all the radar screens in front of you and you're coming in on this big approach, and from about 10 miles out, they're going to be saying, go left 2 degrees, right 1 degree, and you're coming in. So you're really nicely lined up, but it's all controlled by somebody on the ground. And that means that you can get all the way down to 200 feet decision height, so less than the height of a pylon. Excuse me. And at that point, you're going to ping out of cloud, because I'm in thick cloud. I can't see anything at all. And you ping out of cloud and you're hopefully lined up with a runway and you just touch down. Anyway, they said, would I accept a talk down from a trainee air traffic controller? And this is where this ridiculous, oh, I am invincible, I have 30 hours on type, of course I can, you know, can-do attitude. But actually, this is where it completely bit me. The answer would have been to any sensible person, no, of course I cannot do that. This is ridiculous. You know, we're on minimum fuel. It's horrific weather. And so I'm coming in on this approach with this trainee saying 5 degrees left, 10 degrees right. At one point, he said 15 degrees left. Now, as I ping out of cloud at 200 feet, I am not lined up on my runway. I'm lined up on the apron where all the aircraft are all parked and the runway is right over there. Minimum fuel, oh my goodness, can I do it? Yes, I can. I am the girl. So I pull the aeroplane to the right and I slam it down, centre line of the runway. And this is a really, really wide runway. And one thing they had told us in the brief, which I still think is this ridiculousness on sort of threat and error management, is half the runway was ridged. So if you can imagine, they've put like these little lines in because they have a lot of really poor weather out there. And if it's really raining on what we call a contaminated runway, you have to land on the ridge side. The other side is smooth. And ordinarily, for the entirety of your training up to that moment, you always land on the centre line. So here I am, 200 feet, I am the girl, dun, 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 centre line, thank you very much, smack it down, engage thrust reverse, and at one point, straight away, my wheel on my right starts aquaplaning on the smooth side of the runway. I spun through like 120 degrees, and I'm going backwards down the runway at 160 miles an hour. And at this point, my navigator said, I'm not ejecting yet. And I thought, shit, never even thought about ejecting. Let's just say it tightens and let's say it focuses your attention somewhat. But the other thing that he did say was loss of directional control. He didn't go, oh my God, this is a nightmare. He said loss of directional control, which is a known drill. and I practiced that in the sim. So it's that triggers for automatic processes. He says, loss of direction control, my hand goes, cancel thrust, reverse back to idle, and I do the drills. Amazing. And eventually we came to a standstill. It was really quite funny. We came to a standstill and we were still going sideways, but we happened to be lined up perfectly with the exit point for the taxiway. And I thought, oh, winner. So I just power up. But as I power up, I've obviously still got idle thrust reversing, and we start to go backwards. And I said, what on earth is happening? Because at this point, I am in complete and utter overwhelm. You know, I'm still a student as well. And he just went, Mandy, you've got thrust reversing, you stupid cow, sort of thing. I was like, oh, of course I have, you know, and clicked that out. And we taxied in. And my God, it was one of those, I learnt about flying from that. I mean, there was so many times we could have prevented that happening, but we didn't. You know, everything from the fuel state to the weather to the diversion to the torque down to the... You know, every single thing was just a chink in that chain, and we should have broken it a long time before, but we didn't.
How much does one of these jets cost?
About £35 million for the Tornado. I mean, I don't know how much the F-35 is. I mean, they must be up in the sort of 70 millions, I'd have thought, if not more.
Jeez.
Yeah.
How much damage have you done to them?
Actually, none.
Not much.
No, nothing to a Tornado. A Hawk, I did damage once. We were heading low level down what's in Wales, basically down Lake Vyrnwy, which is a big reservoir, and you basically position yourself as what's called a battle pair. So this is how you would always go to, or it's always as a pair of aircraft, normally as 4, and you're on either side of the lake. And as we're heading down this lake, I looked and I saw my wingman had an aircraft coming directly towards him, and I yelled, you know, threat on your nose, 6 o'clock. As I looked to the front, let's just say my screen was full of his wingman that was right in front of me. Now, your closure at that point will be over 850 miles an hour closure. I pulled back on my control column and I pulled over 9G in a snap manoeuvre. Now, it was only actually, the limit was a 7G force on this aeroplane. I pulled 9G, and I ended up at 20,000 feet. And I was like, oh my God. And my wingman went, where are you? I went, I appear to have bust through the levels. I'm now in some sort of like, not airspace that I shouldn't be in. I said, I'm sorry, I'm at 20,000. I have literally just met the wingman of the person that I called as your threat. And he was like, oh my God. Anyway, I actually moved the wings. The wings moved by a few millimetres, so they had to do a whole...
Wow.
Engineering, but a bit cheaper than losing the jet.
That's not bad in an
and losing the
career.
pilot. And 2, in the entire career, yeah.
And didn't those moments where you're up there and it's a high stressful situation, did you have any coping mechanisms of anything that you like put into place to make sure you didn't get overwhelmed by all the things that are happening?
I think you don't necessarily need coping mechanisms in that moment. And that's because of your training. Yeah. You know, they talk about this situational awareness is this little buzz phrase that we use all the time. You must have situational awareness. And it's imagine that, I always think when you first start out, you really lack situational awareness. You haven't built up that bigger picture of what's going on. And you'd often describe it as water skiing behind the jet. So you've got your jet's here and you just feel like you're hanging onto this rope, but everything that you're processing is happening behind the jet. And the whole skill is to try to get your processing in front of the jet, so that when something happens, you're like, yeah, I know that's going to happen. And that is done by always saying, like, my next event is. So you program yourself. So you come up to, say, for example, you're at low level and you're coming up and you're doing a sort of a navigation trip. You know, you go past the turning point, boom. You don't go, oh, and relax. You say, right, as soon as you roll out, my next event is, I've got a turning point in 3 minutes' time. It's a pylon. It's on the edge of a wood. The wind is from the right. Need to put in some here. Okay, dunk. Now look out the aeroplane. So it's almost like you're constantly saying, my next event. How am I thinking ahead? And by doing that, you're forcing yourself to be bigger picture outside. And it's a really good philosophy for life, isn't it? How often when things happen do we go, oh, that was brilliant, sit on my laurels, aren't I? Great. But actually it's almost like, well, that's happened, right, what's next? How can it be better? What's the next event? And that's something I've always done now throughout the whole life. But yeah, that training really helps. Your team really help as well. So you've always normally got women up there as well. And that camaraderie and that decision making, all of the training that you've had just means that you've got the mechanisms that you need to cope.
Nice.
Thinking about the kind of emotional impact on these decisions, I know we briefly touched on it before, but let's say, for example, you're struggling with the decision, you're unsure about the decision. With fast jet combat, I imagine you're not face to face with your target. Does that make it easier to disengage and separate your mind? Because essentially it's just a picture on a screen.
It's brilliant. So you're absolutely right. And I used to say, for the guys on the ground, they're looking to the whites of the eyes.
Mm-hmm.
For us, we're still in our office. Sure. Our office is now in a very hot environment, but we're still surrounded by the same pieces of metal that we were when we're in the UK training. And so there is a level of detachment from what you're doing, which is why it's really interesting when you look at like the mental health and like PTSD issues that we're seeing. You're seeing so many more from the Afghanistan conflict because the fast jets were all flying at low level, and they were seeing the effects of their actions with immediacy. And they were seeing the effects of other people's actions because they were seeing, people coming through who were suffering life-changing injuries. And we've all seen the outcomes of those as well. But for ourselves, we were in a medium-level war in Iraq, so we weren't in the weeds, we weren't flying low level. And I think a really great example of that was we were tasked to go on a mission right to the north, just south of Baghdad, actually. And it was a night mission. It was really top secret. President Bush Jr. had just taken over, and we wondered if it was like a flexing of his muscles, But it actually was also, we were about to lose all of our intelligence because they were about to put all of the, our communications networks were all about to go underground with fibre optics, and we knew this. And so they decided that we would destroy a fibre optics hub that they knew was about to go online. That was our target that night. As we turned to the north, we were seeing tracer rounds coming up. I mean, night vision goggles came down. We were literally, it was like bonfire night. Weapons, surface area missiles, but they didn't seem to be targeting specifically. It was almost just like a show of force from them. Anyway, we came round onto my target, and it was so clinical. I was what's called the cooperative attack, so I wasn't dropping a weapon that night, my wingman was, but what we were doing was lasing the target. So that means that the weapon is dropped on a GPS coordinate down to a matter of meters, and then to hone the angle that that's going to enter the building, you as the cooperative laser guiding missile, we're going to put some laser energy onto it. So if you can imagine it building, the GPS target is going to hit right-hand side of building. Hold on a minute. My laser-guided energy is going to be highlighting door frame. And I am literally targeting a door frame so that my weapon will go in and it won't explode immediately on impact. We've got a delay set into that fuse of that weapon that will destroy, and I mean that it explodes once it's in the basement where the fibre optics are. So anyway, we did this mission. It was clinical. It was really dunk, dunk, dunk. There was no chatting. It's like someone directing people to the aisle in a library. And we landed, and when we landed, I mean, you're in a bit of overwhelm mode. The adrenaline's really high. And we were just about to start our debrief when we heard from the Americans, and they said, we happen to have an unmanned aerial vehicle above you. Would you like to come and see all the footage? We were like, oh my God, yeah. I mean, you never see it from that perspective for us. We only see it from our perspective. And we literally saw this footage of this building, and you can see, because it was all done on infrared, so anything that's hot is glowing white. Man opens door is on the opposite side of the building to the one we were lasing on the other side. The man opens the door, he's having a cigarette, and he's drinking some hot fluid. He has his cup of tea, and this is all on the footage. He throws some of the remaining bit on the floor. He turns around, he shuts the door at the exact moment our weapon went in. You could have heard pin drop until this happened. Then everyone was like, and you're literally holding your breath thinking, oh my God, that was probably the first time I had witnessed, like firsthand in a very different perspective, the impact of your actions. And then the door opens, the bloke comes out of the building, runs and gets in his car and just drives straight through the desert. And as he drove off, he was in a car park and there was a fencing around it. He just drove straight through the fence, and it was good. We could see it going ping, 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 ping. It was like a Disney film. And he drives off, and we all went, oh. And in that moment, I think the important thing there is that recognition of you are not doing things because you want to kill people. You're doing things because this is your job to do them, and people might die as a consequence of your actions, but you're not there because you're bloodthirsty. You know, and that's where that integrity and that value set really come into play. And we were all delighted he had survived because, you know, we had not believed that there was anyone in the building that night, you know, and all the rest of it. So we hope that no one died in that incident, and that's what you can hope. But that brought the reality of your job right into the forefront of your mind.
How did he survive that? If it went in?
Door frame.
And then
he was literally standing under a door frame, and the bomb impacted in the floor, which would have shaken the whole building, but it didn't just immediately collapse. Wow, so
incredible.
Amazing.
And then on the footage, I guess the building was going boom. While he's gone off.
Yeah, while he's going, then it starts to implode afterwards. Absolutely.
Remarkable.
It was remarkable. I mean, it was like nothing we'd ever seen. And we were all like shell shocked because we all were like, bloody hell.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So obviously that's had a huge impact on you, and you were thinking about that for days. Were there any other moments that really stuck with you? Maybe not necessarily that you struggled with them, but had to digest and think about after the fact?
I mean, you have things where your own mortality is brought into play. And I think that's, you know, when you're in the armed forces, you are seeing things and experiencing things that the majority of the world will never have to experience. So what it actually means that you do is if you survive that, you will live your life with purpose as a consequence of that. Because I have seen people lose their lives. I have seen people who've died whilst in training. I've been at the forefront of operations, you know, in war zones. And so consequently, it means that you want to live your life with a sense of purpose, and you want to make every single moment count. You know, I lost my brother-in-law who was working for the United Nations in Pakistan. He was only 40 years old when he died. And again, it changed my husband's life because he sort of was like, I've got to live for him, because he's not had the opportunity to experience this. And I think when we have lost people that we love, it makes you want to live your life even more richly because they can't.
Yeah.
And I think if there's anything positive to come out of that sense of duty that we have, that purpose and that sense of community that we will experience is, you know, it's literally the most important thing to me.
Amazing.
And then just like the stigma around mental health in the army and the armed forces in general, because obviously people are macho, big characters, and tended not to want to go and talk about their feelings and things that have happened in life. Do you think it's moved on and people can do that now and it's more accepted in the armed forces?
Absolutely.
Or do they still have a big problem with it?
Yeah, I mean, to give you perspective, when I joined in my entire service career, I didn't hear the word stress mentioned. You know, I had skin rash over my entire body, and I was told, have you changed your washing powder? I mean, no one said, perhaps this could be the outcome of stress. You know, you're in a highly stressful environment. And it was never really mentioned the whole of my training and the whole of my flying. And in 1 year, about 7 years ago, I lost 4 friends, all between the ages of 45 and 55, all former fast jet pilots, all lost their lives to suicide. And that is horrific because of that bottling up, because of that macho sort of attitude. One of my great friends now, Liz, she was a Chinook loadmaster. She has written a brilliant book, Chinook Crew Chick, actually, and she attempted to take her own life 3 years ago now. Unfortunately, was not successful, and she has used her story now to literally reach thousands and thousands of people, and to really raise the visibility about mental health from our armed forces, the likes of Foxy from SAS Who Dares Wins. You've got some really good, strong role models, really strong men and women who are out there who are now saying it's okay to talk. And I think that message is getting through because there are so many more mental health charities now, so much more support. There's so much more being done on the front line as well to actually help our guys who are out there and doing the job. Because what they are seeing has got to be talked about. You cannot bottle things up. It's the worst thing that you can possibly do. And you can see that in the workplace for anyone, can't you? You know, when you're seeing that people are stressed, it's sometimes easy not to go, just say, how are you, mate? And they go, I'm fine. And you think, oh, you're so blatantly not fine. But I think that we have a responsibility of care to our friends to say, can I ask you that one more time? Are you really fine? or as Liz always says, put a number on it for me. And I think that's great, because if you suddenly go, I'm actually a 3, well, you're a 3. Okay, well, what do we need to do? How can I help you? Or what do you need from me to ensure that we're getting up from being a 3? Because being a 3 is not good out of 10. So I think that whole thing is about recognising, giving people tools and giving them an opening to speak. And that is what our mental first aiders are doing within businesses as well. And certainly all our first aid, our mental health first aid charities are helping do.
And do you think, because there's always in the news about the shortage of people signing up for the armed forces, do you feel like mental health in general is probably one of the reasons people don't want to be involved in something like that, because it's such a high pressure situation? There's lots of things that I
think it's a very, very complex set of circumstances that are leading to our lack of our problems with recruiting at the moment. I think we've potentially lost a little bit of identity. So I'm only talking on the perspective, for example, I'm thinking of my 2 sons. They don't feel this huge loyalty towards the UK. They're not going, oh, I just want to serve my country. They're like, I want to go and live in Dubai because, it's hot. And one of them's currently living in Australia and the other one can't wait to go. And it's all that sort of feeling of that they haven't got that same sense of identity of why they want to serve. I did want to serve. I wanted to serve my country. And that was a huge sense of pride in doing that. Perhaps because we were only 1 generation or 2 generations removed from wartime. Our grandparents had all served in the war. And so that does have an impact as well, I think. But also I just think, we are seeing a very different generation that are coming through now as well, with different ways of processing things as well. And so I think it's about making the armed forces still relevant and feel like a really interesting job, because it is a fascinating job to do. I mean, the stuff that they're doing in airspace and technology is just out of this world. It's exciting. Cybercrime, cyber security area. My God, this is cutting edge stuff. And you have got the technology that's coming through. And so if you can tap into the people, and make it an appealing job for them, it doesn't have to be the desk-based job. That's what people fear the most. I don't want to go and sit in an office 9 to 5. Well, here you don't. But it's actually about recognising that perhaps we need to look at the people we're trying to recruit and make it more appealing to them as well.
I always wanted to be in the SES when I was growing up.
Did you?
Because it wasn't SES Are You Tough Enough. There was another one on BBC before that.
Oh, yeah.
I can't remember what show it was, but I always watched it. I want to do that.
I
but
mean,
then
it's tough. It really
I never
is.
ended up doing it.
No.
working
And
marketing.
this is it, isn't it? Yeah, exactly. But, so my son's best friend, Sam, is joining the Marines, and he joins on Monday.
Yeah.
So, there are some people, and he was just like, that is what I want to do. And this guy has trained so hard. I was giving him some top tips. I said, just learn how to iron.
It's funny though, because I wanted to ask you about mortality and death in service. And my next point was going to be, the biggest risk you face every time you take flight is death. For us, it's somebody drilling and hammering outside the window. So it's quite different outside the windows. It's very, very different. But
Is the drilling okay, by the way? Okay, fine.
We're good. So talk me through, every day when you wake up, do you think there's a chance I could die when I take to the sky?
Do not, otherwise you wouldn't do the job. No. In fact, that was never, ever in my radar. So my biggest fear was letting my team down.
Really?
Yeah, literally. That was the one thing that I'd worry about the most, is not performing to the best, or God letting them down in some way. Being shot down was not my concern. And it's really interesting, because it's only when you come back from doing something like that and your mum says to you, I can actually sleep again. And I was like, really? And she's like, it is horrific. Having a child that's out in a war zone, I literally never ever slept the whole time you were gone. I was like, oh my God. And I said to my husband, was it the same for you? He went, well, he was ex-Navy. I mean, not that they did a proper job. But I'm joking before you suddenly get this barrage from people from the Navy who go, how dare she? As my husband would say, it is the senior service, don't you know? But, at least I was with someone that understood what I was going through, because actually you're not living your life feeling like you're about to die. That is not how you're feeling out there.
And was there ever any moments where it was like a life or death situation where perhaps, I don't know, an enemy locked on and you had to...
Yeah. I mean, the one time when we were engaged by a surface-to-air missile, and it was coming straight towards us, and it was only because my navigator happened to have turned and he saw a missile launch, and he saw the flare from it, and it was launched in a really weird mode. So normally you have a radar, a missile system has a ground-based radar, and you'll we've got something called a radar homing and warning receiver, and you get a spike that would tell you exactly where it's coming from. You go, oh, look, there's a SA-10 down there, it's looking at us, and we'd start to move away from it. We were getting none of that. And basically it's sent in what's called heat-seeking mode, which has a very low chance it will kill you. But if it does, it will get to you undetected because it's not emitting a radar. And it just locked onto the heat of my engines. And so he literally went, oh my God, and he just yelled at me to brake right. And again, a manoeuvre, practiced it so many times. And I sort of slammed the throttles forward and we rolled quickly down to 120 degrees, bring the throttles back to idle. And of course, in that moment, the flares leave and you've now got some confusion because you're sending out a pack of flares that are going to be burning at a hotter temperature than your engine. And they think it's the engine. And then the flares act as that decoy. And it took the surface to air missile and it exploded about 1.5 miles away, maybe 2 miles.
Yeah.
Which felt like quite a near miss, I'll be honest. I may have said a few descriptive words at that point, I can't lie.
And do you always fly with the same person?
No, you don't, sadly. I mean, they do try to give you what's called a constituted crew while you're out there so that you get some real consistency. And the majority of people do. And they'll just do that for that 4-month period that you're out there. I mean, but when we're in the UK, we'll be flying with someone different all the time. But it's not a huge squadron. You've probably only got 15 pilots and 15 navigators. So it's not like there's a huge, difference in who you'll be flying with all the time.
I've just got questions coming to my head. Just Maverick and Goose. I
was thinking about
Top Gun.
Yeah.
Because the only insight I've got into something like this of watching those sorts of films and the training those guys go through is when they're up in the air, they're being chased by the older guys that have been through it and they lock on and they say, I've got you on the missile. Does that happen? Is that the training you guys go through as well?
Yeah, absolutely it does. And especially when you're at the end of your what's called tactical weapons training, which is the final stage of fast jet training before they determine what aircraft you're going to go and then fly and fight on. Yeah. So that's on the Hawk. So you do the first course is how to fly the aeroplane, and the second bit of the course is how to get shot down by the enemy or not to. And that is all air combat. So that is dogfighting. That is 2 ships, 4 ships going off at low level, hitting targets within 5 seconds with a Viper coming in behind you to try to shoot you down while you're in the turn. And we do all this thing called battle turns where you've got to sort of coordinate your turn with your wingman. So you can't just turn left because you're behind each other now. So you're really vulnerable. That's when they will always shoot you down. So this is where we have to practice this thing called battle turns, where if we're turning to the right, both aeroplanes pull up, we cross at this perpendicular angle of exactly 90 degrees, and then you roll out and you're in perfect formation, because that's geometry. And that is what I was actually ending up failing, because I was so concerned with the numbers. I was like, I've gone through 17 degrees and then back. I was always in the wrong place. And that was the point where I very nearly failed the flying training course. I nearly got chopped at that point. But all my course mates got me out the night before my chop ride, and they got me cycling bikes around this big empty parade square, with the wings stuck on their bikes and stuff, and we were pretending to be aeroplanes, and it was just really Top Gun-esque. And we did all this 30 starboard, 60 port, and we did this so many times, and suddenly I thought, oh my God, that's so easy. And I flew the trip the next day, and it went really well. And my pilot just said to me, what the hell was that? You've been rubbish this week, and I thought I was going to have to chop you. And I told him what they'd done, and he just said, wow, I know, I'm absolutely blown away, because he said, there is a level of competition here. The rest of your course, know that they're already secured onto the next courses on the different aircraft types. But because you've now passed Mandy, one of them potentially could take another year to get his course through. Yeah. And so there is a level of competitiveness, but at the same time, the course don't care about that. It's about the selflessness of getting everyone through. Yeah. And, when you talk about camaraderie, that is what it is. That is it. Selflessness builds trust, and that's what you have in the military.
Did everyone get on?
Yeah, we did actually. I mean, there was a couple of people a bit more knobby. No, I'm joking. I'm not mentioning names. No, I will. No, I'm joking. No, we got on really, really well actually. Yeah. We even went to on holiday. We had a bit of a 2-week gap in between one of the courses starting, and we went off to the Dominican Republic on holiday, all of us together. And I'll never forget. I mean, I actually did have a boyfriend at the time, so it wasn't like we were all sort of going off and trying to pull or anything like that. But there was sort of like, I was in this double bed with this guy, you know, we were like pillows down the middle or whatever it was. And, but we all went out and all the guys were like, yeah, I'm a fast jet pilot. And all these women were literally falling over themselves. I said, I'm a fast jet pilot. I've never seen men run so quickly in the opposite direction. I was like, bollocks. That's never going to work. I better just stick with my boyfriend.
Oh,
you know,
amazing.
I suppose I did. So I married him.
Perfect. Go on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, before we move on, that not to bring the tone back down to mortality and that side of things, but curious to understand, like, do you feel that shaped your view on life kind of post-service? Do you value life in a different way?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you know, we were sort of talking about that whole living life for today. But also, I think it's also made me very much a feeling of responsibility to the next generations as well. So, you know, I had this opportunity given to me, and when I left the Air Force, I retrained to be an airline pilot. But ultimately, my heart was never in the commercial sector.
Sure.
It was within military flying, and it's a very different flying type of flying that you're doing. And there's no disrespect to all my friends that are commercial pilots, because I know how challenging it is and how tough it is. But it's just different, and it wasn't one that was necessary for me. And I was flying with this young cadet, because I was doing this flying air cadets as a volunteer. And I flew with this girl, and she was my last cadet of the day, and I was a bit tired, and she was a bit grumpy, and she was not particularly forthcoming in anything, quite frankly, and had a lot of eye makeup on. I was like a bit concerned that under G-force, the sheer weight of mascara might prevent her from opening her eyes, you know. Anyway, we sort of got airborne, and I was like, oh, you know, do you want to do this? She said, oh, all right, you know. And we did the whole flight, and she basically demonstrated to be the most talented aviator at a really raw grassroots level I'd ever flown with. And when we landed, I said to her, you know, is this something you might want to do because you're brilliant? She said, oh, just bet you say it to everyone. I said, I've never said it to anyone. Is this something you might want to do? You're phenomenal. And she was like, oh my God, it's all I've ever wanted to do. I was so scared I was going to fail. I decided not to try or show you I was interested and back away from the opportunity. And it sort of really made me reflect on how often we as humans do that. You know, we read all these motivational books, we listen to some wonderful podcasts, but ultimately they always talk about leaning in towards opportunities, but I don't think we do that, especially not the Brits. And so what we do is we lean into a certain degree, and then right towards the end, we just lean out a bit and we go, well, I could have done it if I'd ... And so we've got to almost try and work out what our ... is. What is it that's stopping us from doing something? And once we've identified that, think, right, I've got to smash it. I've got to stop that. And I said to her, how are you doing at school? And she said, oh, I hate school. I said, school enables that. You're brilliant. I could almost hear the cogs turning in her brain, because we talk about this need to be resilient all the time. But what is resilience? It's not just bounce back ability, is it? It's about having a purpose and therefore aligning with where we're going with our purpose, so that when something happens, we might need to stretch off, but then we've got the ability to come back because I know where I'm going. And that's really what it was for me. When people say, my God, you were so determined at every stage. You know, I was told I had an obesity problem because their height charts went to 5'8" and I'm 6 foot. They said, you're 3 stone overweight. I was like, well, I'm not actually. What do you want me to do? Cut a limb off? Well, guess what? I did. I lost the 3 stone in weight because I was that determined to do it. And so it's not that I was amazing, this incredible character. I was just really purpose driven. And I think that's the whole point, isn't it? Is that, you know, when she now had her purpose, she worked out why it was important to do well at school. But what's the point in doing well at school if you've got no purpose? I don't give a damn about the history of mankind, or I don't give a damn about physics until you're giving me a reason to give a damn about it. And I think that's where we're lacking a bit in our education system at the moment, is that loss of sense of what the why, what's the point, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
You mentioned there about the world of commercial flights and things like that. I've always been curious about the kind of world of air shows. How does that all work out? Because we see on social media about, you know, the accidents. Like, how does that all work?
Okay, so air shows actually have an incredible safety record.
Right.
So I have a role now, which is I'm a trustee of the RAF Charitable Trust, which is not many people sort of completely grasp it, but basically the biggest, largest air show, military air show in the world is the Royal International Air Tattoo, which is held at Fairford every year, and run by the RAF Charitable Trust enterprises side of it. All the profits from that air show go straight to our charity,
Right.
and we aim to reach 500,000 young people a year in STEM-related activities. So this is not a plug, but this is a lovely little segue into this, is because, so actually I'm a good person to speak to because I sit on a board and I listen to the safety side of it.
Fantastic.
The safety is absolutely critical. So there was the horrible incident at Shoreham where I think it was 11 men lost their lives in that one when the airplane crashed. But they haven't, and then we had an incident at Bournemouth Air Show, which was actually a civilian aircraft with a wing walker on the top as well. So it's not that you see it's not that there are a huge amount, and the amount of time that goes into the safety of these air shows. So every year what you have is you have a display pilot. So the Typhoon has a display pilot. There's the Red Arrows, that's their pure job. But you've got the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight. It's their job to do the displays. Right. But you'll have them from all over the world. And so the F-35 has a display pilot, and that's their job for that season, is they are just performing at air shows all over the world. And why is that important? Because ultimately there's a huge demand for it still as well. And, what we see is that the cutting edge of, say, military aviation, things like using sustainable air fuel, the F-35, so it was the Typhoon this year did a display using purely sustainable air fuel. Right. Well, that's great because it's saying we've got the technology and therefore we need to be starting to put that more and more into different things. So, a bit like Formula One, how you've got things that go onto Formula One cars because they are agile, they can adapt really quickly and they can make changes and they're really innovative. Well, guess what? All those same innovations finally come through to the cars that we drive. And that's going to be the same in aviation. That, the brains working on military jets and the technology for the future will reflect and be used in different areas as well. So safety is the number one concern at air shows. It really is. And they have done so much to try to make air shows safer and safer. And so obviously things do happen, and that is the sadness of it. I mean, the Shoreham one was just tragedy beyond tragedy, and as it happens, my friend was a lawyer that was involved in that case as well. So, these things do happen.
I wonder if there's an element of there are cameras, there's people recording it, so you feel like there's more because you see so much of it.
Oh, I see what you mean. Sorry, I thought you were meaning from the pilot's perspective.
Oh, no.
No, I mean, for us, it's, it's absolutely black and white. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right that therefore you would see more of that footage because it is being recorded.
And social media amplifies it.
Yeah, of course it does. Of course it does.
And then I'm just going to ask some obscure questions because I've got them
Throw
on my
them out
mind.
there.
Did you have any pre-flight superstitions or something that you'd always keep in the cockpit?
No, I'm sorry, but that is very Top Gun-esque. I did not have a photo of my husband and children. I used to stick up and kiss before going and then hold the dog tags, No, actually, I didn't. The only one I would always have is make sure you have a wee before you get airborne, otherwise you're just going to end up in a disaster.
And then if one of the planes that you flew could talk, what would they say about you as a pilot?
I've never been asked that question. Yeah. They would say silky smooth. Oh yeah, great fun. Yeah, no, I think I was always quite a smooth operator. I had a good set of hands, is what they would say. And that's what we would always say in the Air Force. If someone's quite a nice operator, they'd say they've got a good set of hands. Nice. My husband's always been known to have a good set of hands, but he's not even a pilot. No, he is a pilot as well, I promise. Yeah.
Was there a particular moment that provoked an emotion you didn't expect, like any really funny moments in the air?
Oh, well, it wasn't in the air, but I can share a really, really funny incident. So every year you have to undertake something called nuclear, biological and chemical warfare training, when you have to get into full NBC kits. NBC is nuclear, biological and chemical warfare. And it's like the kit that you'll see when you see people in war zones when they're wearing all of the kit and gas masks and hoods and helmets, and we all go into a gas chamber. We were in this gas chamber, and I'd had my children by then, and I was based at a place called Boscombe Down, and so I was quite old in the tooth at this point. And when you go in for this training, you're not necessarily with your squadron mates. I was with a bunch of really new recruits. They were all apprentices. They were 18-year-olds. And we went into this gas chamber, and we went in straight after lunch. And they locked the door. And basically what they do is they break open this canister, and then this noxious CS gas rises up. And you can sort of see it rising up. And it got to about waist deep. I suddenly heard the worst noise you've ever heard. It was like, it's my own phone and it's in my pocket. But it's like in my flying suit, which is under my NBC kit. I couldn't get to it. But also it was the days before touch screen, so it wasn't like the Apple. It was ones with buttons. And I thought, so I felt it and I thought, okay, if I press that button, it will stop the ringing. Because it was ringing and everyone was like looking around going, who is it? And finally it was the sergeant who went, whoever's phone that is, ma'am, can you just turn it off? I was like, I'm so sorry. And I pressed the button and I hit loudspeaker. I must have answered it. It was a voicemail message and it was my husband. And this noise came out and he went, where's my sexy woman? And basically, this awful message, which, I mean, he won't mind me saying it, but he'd had 4 children by then. He didn't want to populate the world any further. And so he'd been for a small operation that men have at that stage of life. And if you can imagine what the follow-up operation involved or the follow-up appointment involved, it's performing a certain act of which you have to collect a sample. And he was telling us all about it in this voicemail message, basically about his performance in a hospital toilet with some certain magazines, of which everyone was erupting with laughter. I mean, we're in a gas chamber. People are bent over. I'm hitting my chest to try and stop it. In the end, they just had to say abandon the whole thing. Everyone had to run out and we're all like spluttering and laughing. And I've learned that, you know, never to have a mobile phone on in public, but also that when you're really embarrassed and your pores open because you're so hot, it absorbs the CS gas. And for days afterwards, every time I thought back to it, I got this hot flush and then my whole skin would start stinging with the thought of CS gas. It was like my humiliation. But my God, it was so funny.
Brilliant. It sounds a bit of a weird question to ask. Like, how would you celebrate after a successful mission? Would you celebrate? Is that something people do?
Well, you have a debrief. So, I mean, something that you do.
It's like a weird thing to say, to celebrate.
Yeah, it's never a celebration. Unless it is a celebratory mission, like you've done an incredible fly past over London for the, coronation or something like that. So there are trips, or you go off and you have an incredible mission of training, In the UK, we go, God, that was bloody brilliant, my God. I mean, because, there is, the buzz you get of flying low level around Scotland or, it's just outrageous. I love it. So, but, every single trip you fly, you debrief it. And I think there's that whole thing of it, what the debrief does, it sort of has this funnel where you say what happened to the facts, why, the cause, but most importantly, how can we be better? So that's where your incremental learning comes. But what you're actually providing people with in that space is a technical debrief, but also an emotional one. Yeah. Because you're on a mission in that debrief with the people who have been there. There's no hierarchy, leave your stripes at the door. And, it really is a flat line of what happened, let's decompress, let's talk about everything. And so actually by doing that, you're sharing those same emotions and same experiences so that when you come out, it was the mission that we were on in Iraq where it all had gone sort of like a little bit, holy Christ. And then when we landed, I remember it was like dawn and we went back and someone had a big hubbly bubbly pipe. It's not drugs, by the way, it's just like a bit of apple shisha and stuff because we're in Kuwait. And there were all these hubbly bubbly pipes because there's no alcohol over there and we wouldn't be drinking anyway, but... and they just got all these apple and strawberry shishas and we're all sitting around going and suddenly you hear the wailing of the call to prayer suddenly starts at 5 a.m. and I just remember sitting there thinking, oh my God, we've been up since like 6 a.m. yesterday morning and it's now 5 a.m. and I'm about to go to bed. And it just felt like a different world, but yeah.
Amazing. And the final question, this one's all about life advice. So we ask each guest what life advice they'd pass on to the next one, regardless of who they are and what they do. So, but I also want to ask you what you think of the life advice of the previous guest, who was Jamie Hull, who survived a plane crash. He was on fire for 45 seconds. He had 64%
of his body
64%
covered in burns, 60 surgeries.
6 surgeries, drug-induced coma for 6 months, and in hospital for 2 years. So his advice was,
oh my God,
hold on, never give up, and believe in yourself.
I say it's pretty good advice, really. Yeah, and that's sort of the advice that I normally would say. Gosh, when you put it with his perspective, that's pretty important, isn't it? I think my best advice would be to the next guest is be unapologetically you. Be proud of who you are. Don't feel that you've got to just blend in. It's okay to be different. It's good. Be brave, be bold, radiate and shine.
Yeah,
brilliant.
I guess you've definitely paved the way for being different, being one of the first female RAF pilots. Amazing.
Mandy, thanks so much for coming on. Genuinely loved hearing your story and everything you got to say.
Such a great chat.
Is there anything you want to plug? Maybe your book?
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, if anyone would be interested in reading it, it's called An Officer, Not a Gentleman. Thank you very much, Richard Gere. Which is available through Amazon. And yeah, please give me a follow. I'm on all social media just as Mandy Hickson or Mandy Hickson Speaker.
Wonderful.
All
Brilliant.
the links below.
All the links below.
Excellent. Thank you, Mandy. And we'll see you all next time.
Lovely.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.